If you're going to test drive a used car, does the car roll really hard? If you push in your clutch and let the engine go to idle or shift it in neutral, here it is. I just heard the radiator fans go on. That means you have warped rotors. What's up, people? So today I thought it would be worthwhile going over some tips for you all when you're test driving a car. Typically, you don't need to worry about it for a new car because that's a whole new can of worms. They're new, they're supposed to be perfect, they got a warranty and all that jazz. But if you're going to test drive a used car, whether it's an everyday automatic or you're going to get some classic 80s car like this 1983 Porsche 944, what do you look for? Like, if you're new to it, you're obviously excited because you're going to get a new car and you probably going to get something, maybe it's a sports car you've always dreamed of, but you've got to keep yourself level-headed and really assess everything that's going on. So you don't miss something that would really warrant negotiating different terms, or worse yet, finding a car of something that you really have to walk away on. So today I'm just sitting in the car, we're going to do a basic one and just kind of go over some tips on driving. Earlier last week I did a video on what to look for on the outside, so today let's go for what you're doing on the inside. Now the first thing is, it's raining. That's not an ideal time to test drive cars for a multitude of reasons. It's harder to see the bodywork. Obviously, it's going to get dirty, so you're not going to be able to assess the condition there as well, unless it's in a garage. And it can be a little annoying, although you get a better opportunity to test out the climate control, as well, windshield wipers and such. And obviously, in a new car, you want to be familiar with it. So if you're in a sports car or something like that, be smart in a car that you haven't driven so you don't end up losing control in slippery conditions. So the first thing is, if let's say this is a brand new car to you, you're going to test drive it. The first thing that's pretty important is, ideally, you want to do the first startup when the car is cold, like it has not been warmed up that day. And that's important so you can tell how the car starts up when it's cold as well as hot, because we're going to want to restart this later. Now, before I go ahead and do it, obviously you want to familiarize yourself with all the gauges that you have going on and use all that to you. I've got a water temperature gauge here. I got fuel. Obviously I got a miles per gallon that's largely based on vacuum, I think, in this. Tachometer, speedometer. There is an oil pressure gauge. So for me, when I first started up, I'm going to listen to it, but I'm also going to watch that oil pressure gauge immediately. So naturally in this car, obviously going to neutral, and I got the clutch in, being safe. I turn it to the on position, I see some idiot lights come on, the battery gauge, the oil pressure warning light, meaning there's no oil pressure because it's not started. And also I'm going to make sure the climate control is off. I don't want the radio on, I don't want climate control on, nothing. And if I have a passenger, I want them to be quiet so I can listen. So you can hear relays and stuff clicking. Make sure there's not any weird buzzing, like do the door buzzers or beepers work? In this case they do. So I'm gonna go ahead and start it. Starts up good. I heard just the hint of a lifter tick going tick, 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 just for a moment, but it immediately went away, so not worried about that. This is an older car. Also, my oil pressure gauge immediately went whoosh, pegged at what appears to be 4.5, 5 bars, so that's really as good as it gets right now. I see, and this car I drove this car today, so it kind of cheated there. But keep in mind, so obviously your water temperature should be dead cold. Now, the things you're going to notice are, one, how is it idling? This car is idling at less than 1,000 RPMs. What could be, I don't actually know the graduations, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1,000. So presumably those are going to be 200 RPMs each. So this appears to be idling at 850 right now. It's doing so smoothly. It's rock solid. Oh, that was lightning. It's not the car. Toss gets out listening to it, and I'm listening. I hear a little bit of vibration. You can feel it in the wheel and all, but this is an older car, nothing crazy. So listen and feel for vibration. Is the idle getting goofy? I'm going to just bump the throttle just a little, 1100, and let it return. I'm going to see if it stumbles at idle, does anything weird, and goes from there. Now, if you just started up a car, that, especially that's not yours yet, you got to respect another person's car. So guys, girls, everybody, if you're test driving somebody else's car, that is not an opportunity for a free rental to beat the crap out of it. That is your opportunity because you're looking at something to buy. So please be respectful of other people's things. I just want to throw that out there. And as a note, be respectful of it also, because if you buy it, it's going to be your car. So don't screw it up. So the other thing is, when a car is cold, don't go revving the crap out of it, because it hasn't gotten to operating temperature, the oil hasn't heated up, it's not going to be circulating as well. There's a lot of vintage cars that if you just start revving up when it's cold, you can do serious damage to the bearings and stuff. So be reasonable to it. But if everything feels good, sounds good, and all, you got your seatbelt on, you're ready for a test drive. So we got a lot of different systems going on. We got brakes, we got a throttle pedal, we got a clutch, we got gears, whether it's automatic or manual. I'm going to talk about both, this of course being manual. So Got my mirrors, everything's adjusted right. It's a little fogged up in here, so I am gonna turn on some sort of ventilation. This is my opportunity to make sure that the air conditioning works. Air conditioning acts as a dehumidifier, so if you force that up into the vent, it's dehumidified air being air conditioning, whether you have the heat on or not, and that's why it will defog your windshield. So let's see if this works in the car that is now mine. So I'm obviously gonna fix the climate control over. It's not blowing out of the top. You gonna do it? I'm feeling, I got nothing. It still keeps wanting to blow out of the front, so I'm putting these down. Well, that's gonna be frustrating. Let's see if I turn off the air conditioning, if it'll do it. And just go with the normal. And now that's interesting. It's kind of annoying, actually. So in this car, if I turn the AC on for the compressor, it will only blow at your head. It won't blow out of the vent up here. So I'm gonna have to go straight on the just the fan to see if it'll get away the fog. But obviously I can see well, so I'm gonna get going. Okay, clutch is in. I'm gonna try to engage reverse. Okay, no problem. Obviously I'm immediately feeling the clutch. I don't feel any chatter, I don't feel any grabbing. I can modulate it well, that's good. This already feels pretty solid. It went into gear well. My shifter, how do I got it? There's a little bit of play here. It's a little sloppy. That happens to 944s. I got a forward and back slop. So I just want to mind that. So I'm gonna go left, engage first. Engage is fine. Now, obviously there's a lot of things. You want to make sure that you put it in gear properly, that it doesn't pop out of gears when you're accelerating or decelerating, that when you shift, if you shift properly, it doesn't grind. If you screw it up, well then that's your fault. But if you're shifting perfectly and reasonably and it's grinding goes into gear, that means you have a worn synchro. So, all right, let's go. All right, so I'm in first gear. Now the car's colder. I'm just slowly revving it up. Not doing anything crazy, just really listening. I'm in second gear. Went in second gear fine. Smooth. I'm shifting about 3,500 there. Not really romping on it. Just want to start feeling it out. Are the wheels shaking? Is there air leaking? What's going on here? Going into fourth gear. So no problem so far. Looks like the gauge is working. I can see the water temperature coming up. Obviously it's a new car to you, especially if it's an older car, an older sports car. Make sure it's not overheating. So we're gonna test some things out a little bit. But first thing, I'm driving along 55 miles an hour, it's the speed limit. My steering wheel is slightly cocked to the left. Not necessarily the worst thing in the world, might just need a little basic alignment with the just the tie rods and the adjustment there. You'll want to look and make sure all the tire pressures just appear to be right. It could be a low tire or something doing that. But in general, if I were to let go of the wheel, and I'm not suggesting you do it, but this car is tracking a very nice straight line. Keep in mind that if your car is drifting one side or the other, it might just be the crown of the road. But if there's undulations in the road and the car starts being real jerky, depending on what it is, it could be a loose tie rod, a loose ball joint, so that when one tire hits the undulation, it sort of steers one direction or another. Move it, birdie. Yeah, move. Silly dove. Also, don't hit animals. Anyway, so some things to think of there. Is the car pulling a lot? If you're at speed, is the steering wheel shaking? If your steering wheel is shaking, it might just be a wheel weight, a tire out of balance, or it could be a feathered tire. So that's something you can make mental note of and then look at later. Obviously, it doesn't cost a lot of money to get a tire rebalanced. In this circumstance, no issues. Now, the gearbox feels great when I'm shifting it to the synchro, so I'm not terribly worried about that. There is a little bit of slop in it, so I can read those bushings. Driving the car normally, and I would consider this normal driving, I'm not being sporty, I didn't notice anything funny with the clutch. It modulated really well. Right now the brakes are good. They're not warped or screwed up on the rotors. So keep in mind that if you're braking in a car and your brake pedal is pulsing, that means you have warped rotors, most likely. And you can also feel the shaking in your steering wheel. If you start braking and the steering wheel shaking like this and your brake pedal's pulsing, you got warped rotors. So you either need to take them off and take them to a machine shop or somewhere where they can turn them, which is machining them flat again and true, or you're gonna need replacements. A lot of cars are quite expensive for replacements. So if you can turn them, that's great. That may not work in some circumstances, you may need to replace it, but you guys look into the right parts. But keep that in mind with the braking, that's something to do. Also, and you want to test a car where there's not much traffic, because to really test it, you have to do some things that are a little unusual for traffic. I'm not suggesting doing crazy hole shots or power slides or anything like that. So I'm out in the countryside, I've got no traffic anywhere behind me, I've got just nothing going on around fields, so I'm gonna brake in a straight line a little heavily and just see. Not bad, brake pedal feels good, it's grabbing the way it should, there's no pulsing, everything's reasonably fine. No sense in really going all the way to threshold to lock it up because I can tell it's firm, and of course if I wanted to lock up the brakes, I could. If this car was an ABS, I might take it to the point of threshold to see if the ABS kicks on or if it freaks out the system. But of course, if you're gonna do something like that, you need to be smart and far away from anybody or anything that would be surprised by what you're doing. And also, don't do anything that you're not confident with to getting in control. But in my circumstance, I would want to test that to some extent too. But a better alternative, most likely for everybody, is run a diagnostic. If you want to do a PPI and get with a mechanic that has all of the data acquisition, OBD2 readers, whatever, they can actually run a diagnostic to see if it's working well, then you can save yourself having to do that. So please, again, do not go out and drive abnormally or do something you're not comfortable with or is safe on the count of it. I'm just telling you ways that I might assess a car, okay? So, the brakes are pretty good. I'm checking that. I feel reasonably confident in that. They're working well. Obviously, you're gonna look at it. You can kind of get on and off and feel it. There's nobody behind me. I'm slowing down a little bit. So if I dive on the brakes, how much does the car dive? You can start telling the shock. If I accelerate, does it wallow? And then lastly, and this is something, don't do this a lot, but if I kind of just go like this, just gently on it like this, does the car roll really hard? Now, older cars, such as this one, they roll more. They just do. They've got tires with a lot taller sidewall. They're sprung softer, and quite frankly, an older car like this is going to have shocks that are worn on the dampening. So it's going to roll a little bit. Any car is. Well, most any car. But you can start to feel, if you go left to right gently, not enough to lose control or get sideways, but just gently, if you start to see like it rolls like more one way or it really wallows like on one wheel, that might tell you you've got a bad shock or bad shocks. You might also start hearing, if you go over where there's bumps, just little bumps, and you start hearing clunk, 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 clunk. You could have bad ball joints, you could have bad bushings in your shocks, etc. So going over some little stutter bumps and such is a good way to tell what's going on with your suspension. Is it nice and tight? Does it have anything going on? Now, I'm not suggesting, don't go drive some guy's vintage freaking Ferrari through a field or something, okay? Use good judgment. But there's ways to tell. So everything that you're doing, you need to know. All right, so now, I've been driving this for a little bit at just normal driving speeds, looking at the water temperature right in the middle, right where you'd expect it to be. So it seems to be cooling. My oil pressure is reading between 4 and 5 bars with the car all warmed up, presumably. And that's quite good. We're at 2,200 RPMs, and we've got, what, somewhere between 4 or 5 bars. 1 bar, or barometric pressure, is 14.7 pounds per square inch at sea level. So let's just round that to 15 PSI. So if you got 4 bars, you have effectively 60 PSI, if I'm doing my math correctly. Yeah, 15 times 2 is 30, times 2 is times 2 is 60. So I got 60 PSI at 2,000 RPMs. Generally speaking, the old school rule of thumb for how much oil pressure you want in a car is 10 PSI per 1,000 RPMs. So if your car's at 6,000 RPMs, you better be making 60 PSI. Now there's exceptions to those rules, but not lots, okay? So just keep that in mind. And the other thing, quite frankly too, there's a lot of cars nowadays that do not have oil pressure gauge. They just have an idiot light. And there are cars, such as my Aston Martin, that has an idiot light and the oil pressure gauge is a ruse. It doesn't mean anything. So now I'm slowing down, getting into a town. Obviously it's still shifting well, clutch is great, brakes feel good. My throttle is responsive. Do you have any binding in your pedals? Are they loose? Are there things like that that could be an issue? And also with regard to the steering, does it have looseness? Can I steer it like this and have a dead spot? If you do, you could have a worn steering rack, you get bad ball joints, bad steering shaft, and things like your ability to control the car with the pedals, with the shifter, and with the steering wheel. Those are your best pieces of safety because they allow you to control the car precisely. And if there's something in your way of controlling a car precisely, that could be a safety item, as are your tires. So old tires are no good. And of course, wear your seatbelt. It's more than just safety in the event of a collision. It helps keep you in place. So if you needed to maneuver, you would be able to stay planted and maneuver precisely and well. So I never plan on getting in a wreck. I haven't never gotten one where I really needed a seatbelt, but I do find these to be a necessary item for driving. And that's the other thing, you want your seatbelt to work. So if you grab it and do this, does it lock like it should? Or does it just pull out? Is it will it come out like it should and release you when you're slow? I mean, does that work properly? That's a good item to check as well. Obviously you want to check your other things, but as you notice, I have not been paying any attention to the radio or my window. So now it's time to really kind of look a little. I'm gonna turn the radio, well, I don't know if I want to turn the radio on. It's gonna be all copyrighted, but let's just say it turns on, I see my antenna going up and down if you have a car that old, and go through your radio, but unfortunately I can't show you copyrighted music. You can test to see if your speakers work. But just do it for the test. Don't get into really into the moment. Turn it off. Then go through your climate control stuff. Make sure you can go through all your different zones. It will ventilate properly. It'll go hot, it'll go cold, and the air conditioning works, and to what extent. So you know what's going on with that. If your air conditioning doesn't work, it may just need a recharge, and that's something, generally speaking, you can do very cheaply at any local auto parts store on your own, but be smart if you do it. I know I saved my father-in-law thousands of dollars doing that. Dealerships and less scrupulous mechanics love to charge people thousands of dollars to replace everything in the world with their air conditioning systems when oftentimes it just needs a recharge. Then the other thing is your windows. Do they work going up and down? And if you have a newer car with a one push to go up and down, do they work? And then when they go up, do they seal? Do they bind? So testing the windows. You want to go all the way up and all the way down, test them out. This car has a sunroof that goes up and close. Okay, that works well. And then what else? What else do we got here? You got your lights. Do my pop-up headlights work? Oh, it's the 80s. Yes, show me some 80s. And go back down. Beautiful. Maybe I'll do it again for good measure. There they are. People are going to freak out. Obviously, you don't want to make people think you're signaling to them, but that's why I like to get out. Okay, so we've gone through it. We got turn signals. Those were working. It's raining today, so I'm testing my windshield wipers. You want to test that. Windshield wipers can cost a little bit if you get glitches with them. They seem to be working well. However, if it's dry out and you test your windshield wipers and your windshield's dirty, you could kind of micro scratch your windshield. So think about that before you just go ahead and do it. And then beyond that, so I've got a good feel for the way the car is driving kind of normally. So now I'm gonna get a little sportier. I haven't noticed the engine missing or doing anything funny. So we're gonna get into shifting a little bit. And then for anybody driving an automatic, that's a good thing to notice too. So if you're test driving an automatic car, you need to make sure, is it shifting when it should? And when it shifts, is it harsh? Like when it shifts, is it all of a sudden bang like that? You're like, uh-oh. If it does that, there can be issues. Well, obviously there's issues. It could be lash in your drive lane and things worn out, or it could be valved funny, just lots of things. So you wanna know that, because if you buy a car that's got issues with things like clutch, transmission, engine internals, that gets expensive. So if you don't specifically know exactly what's wrong and you have an exact plan of both time and money to fix that, then that's very likely a car you want to walk away from, because there's a lot of fish in the sea, okay? Don't get caught up on just one car, okay? And, you know, and that's the other thing. And if you need to buy a car right now for transportation, then you can't go out and buy a car that's going to be a hand grenade, you know, and just fall apart. So, all right, so we got this person going to drive away. I'm in fourth gear now. I'm going to downshift into third, and I'm just going to roll into it more full throttle. I'm not going to break any speed limits, and obviously I'm being reasonable. This is also a slower car. Actually, we're going slower. I'm going to go down in a second. So I'm in second gear at 3,000 RPMs. I'm just going to roll into the throttle for full throttle. Smooth. I'm not going to red line, just shift it up here. Car's very smooth. I don't feel any misses. Still shifts beautifully. That's quite good. Now, something you can do with a manual car is, if you notice a vibration, you know, when your tachometer is at a certain point, you can narrow it down as to what is it. Is the vibration coming from the engine itself, or is the vibration coming from the driveline or wheels? So keep this in mind. If you're driving down the road and you get a vibration in your steering wheel and dashboard and you feel it at a certain speed, say 55 miles an hour, maybe it's 45, or maybe it's 65 or 70 when you're on the highway, what is it coming from? Is it the wheels? Is it the suspension? If the suspension feels like it's clunking and whatnot, it could be that. If when you get out and you look at your tires and they're feathered, like they're not worn nice and smooth and round, but each tread block kind of looks like a knife, then maybe you have a bad alignment and it's the bad tires doing it, and it's showing you a number of things. But one way in a manual car to tell, so if you got a vibration going on and you're traveling at a speed, if you push in your clutch and let the engine go to idle or shift it in neutral and the vibration's still there, it has to do with the chassis and the wheels and tires, not your engine. And then of course you want to get it back into your right gear, bring the RPMs up and move on. So if the vibration stays and you've pushed in the clutch and you've separated the engine from what's going on and you're just coasting like a soapbox derby car, then you know the vibration is coming from the wheels, tires, or the chassis, etc. Now, if you push in the clutch, and you can do this when the car is not moving, and you gently rev it, I mean, bring the RPMs up slowly. I'm at 2,500. I got the clutch in 30,000, 3,500, almost 4,000. If the vibration comes on that way, then you know it has to do with the engine, okay? And maybe it's not so much the engine. If it's very subtle, it could just be old motor mounts. Maybe they've sagged down and maybe the metal on metal is touching and it's that. So you got to think about that, especially depending on the vintage of your car. But that's a really good tip to isolate where your vibration is coming from by disconnecting the motor. You can do the same sort of thing with an automatic car in neutral. However, lots of modern cars will lose their frickin' mind if you shift them into neutral when you're driving down the road and coast, and then hold the RPM and then put it back into drive. So I don't suggest that technique with a lot of things. You got to know that modern cars freak out, and if you don't feel comfortable doing these things or driving it, then get somebody that does, or just don't do them. Find another way to get the information you need. So, and the other thing is in terms of revving the car up and seeing if the engine is vibrating and you're revving it slowly like this, you can do that with the car stationary. Make sure it's in neutral. Make sure you also have the clutch pushed in. Do not leave it in a gear, okay? Have the clutch pushed in, rev it way up, slip off the clutch and pop the car, okay? That's your fault, not mine, okay? I'm telling you, if you're going to try something like that, make sure you're far away from anybody or any immovable objects, and make sure it's in neutral and the clutch in, okay? Or just don't do it. That's on you. All of this is on you. I'm just trying to help you guys pick out a car, okay? And don't go, what a crazy world we live in, right? Like, I actually have to say this. Like, we live in a world where people don't even understand there's personal responsibility. We all have personal responsibility. Drive safely, be smart, don't do stupid things. If you do stupid things, don't drive safely and you're not smart, don't blame it on somebody else, okay? Simple as that. All right, so anyway, that's how you can do it. And I just noticed this when I went to downshift, kind of didn't want to go into fourth. So that's interesting. Let's see here. Okay, went and find that time. All right. Went and find that time. Now I'm gonna slow down. I suspect maybe there could be something funny in fourth gear. There's nobody behind me, downshifting in third, because I could downshift from fifth into fourth, and it kind of caught one time. Didn't want to go all the way in. So I'm in third gear, I'm accelerate, and I'm gonna go to shift like I normally am. I'm gonna kind of shift kind of dumb and see if it seems fine. It seems fine. But I noticed a little something. Shift's great. I'm gonna just chalk that up to this being a car with a lot of miles. Shift's real great. But to let you guys in on something else, in driving this car, I have noticed if I'm really lazy with my shifts, because the transmission in the car has a bit of wear, sometimes it'll kind of catch and not want to go in. So with this, I just need to be smart and ginger. Just go ahead and put it in the next gear. If I get real lazy, it might say, hey man, I'm old and worn out, I don't want to go in. Just tell me what to do. So there's things like that. You need to be mechanically sympathetic with things going on. Okay, so we've driven around, we really haven't stopped. My water temperature is still great, my oil temperature is still great, but we haven't tested this thing when the car is stopped or idling or stop and go traffic. So what I'm gonna do is find a place up here where I can just pull off, stop the car and let it idle for a little while and see if the water temperature goes up. And even if you don't do stop and go traffic, let's say you want to go through a carry-out order at a fast food place or something, and you're in a long line. Well, you don't want your car overheating. Okay, so here we go. I'm just going to pull over in this driveway. No one, doesn't look like anybody's home, and I'm out of the way here. Just going to back up, make sure I'm out of the way for everybody. And we're just going to sit here for a second. I'm turning this off. I'm going to put my window down because it's going to get hot in here. All right, and we're just going to idle for a second. Now, something else I've noticed about this car, you want to check your fuel gauge, because fuel gauge, especially in older sports cars, can kind of start getting bad. On this 944, it's very rudimentary. It's got a potentiometer basically with coils in it, and as the lever goes up and down, or it has a plunger depending on what style it is, it basically changes the resistance, how many ohms it is, and your gauge sends an electric signal to it and reads how much resistance it has and tells you where to have the needle. Now in this one, as your fuel tank sloshes around a little bit while you're driving, when this one ends up being lower than a half a tank, the needle jumps around. To fix it, I'd have to get into the fuel tank and get in there, clean all that up and fix it. But it gives me a good enough idea where the fuel is. If you have any suspect that the fuel gauge isn't right, let's say it's low, if it's a dealership, something you can ask them to put in some fuel and see if it goes up and reads appropriately. And I don't like buying cars from dealerships. I like buying cars from private individuals because you can ask them questions because they've owned the car, they've lived with it, and they can clue you in as to a lot of the car's history. You buy a car from a dealership, you're not going to get that. And even if you get it, can you really trust them, used car dealers? Okay, we'll not say anything. So I do see the water temperature going up a little bit. There's a low line And there's 1, 2, 3 lines in the middle, and then there's a solid line, which would mean it's getting hot. I don't really know what they are, but generally speaking, the middle's where it should be. It's probably gonna be somewhere between 185 to 200 degrees. And right now it's at the 3rd line, so I'm just gonna wait. And the reason I have my windows down is, here it is. I just heard the radiator fans go on. They've come on at the top line, and I'm gonna watch it to see if it goes back down. You wanna make sure that when the car is sitting and heat soaking, getting hot with no airflow, that it goes up and it'll come back down. On modern cars, you don't really have to worry about it. They're really rock solid. On older cars like this, you actually might see it climb and then go back down. Yeah, it is going down now. That makes me feel really good. The fans kicked on like they should. And then the other thing you can do is, fans are generally wired to always come on, cooling fans of the engine, when you turn on your air conditioning compressor. So if I click this on and the fans are not running, I want to hear those come on. Maybe not all cars are like that, but older cars are generally like that. So that's something you want to know. You want to know your cooling fans work, because you don't want to get a car and be all excited about it, be all driving around, getting used to it, and then all of a sudden find out you overheated your car, blow a head gasket, and you got thousands of dollars. When you could have just found out, hey, it needs a radiator fan, there's something going on with it. Maybe it's a simple fix, maybe it's a fuse, maybe it's a relay, maybe it's the fans. Either way, it could be a little bit of a bargaining chip. You know, let's be fair and reasonable, or maybe you want to walk away depending on what the car is and how bad that may be, but at the very least you want to fix those things before you actually start driving and enjoy it. And if you're not a lifetime mechanic and builder like me, it's going to be trickier. So you have to weigh these things. And also for all you young people out there going to buy something, especially a 944, please be realistic about how much time and money it takes to get into a project. There are many cars out there that you or I could fix up, but it may not be worth the time and money to put it in, when it would be a better idea just to find a better example. So as a note, the car is now heat soaked really well, started to get hot, and the water temperature and the cooling came down. So right now the oil temperature is going to be about as hot as it's going to be. And at idle here, at the same nice idle, right about 850, I would guess, it's holding at about 2.5 bars. So that's, what is that? It's about like 37 PSI. That's not bad considering this engine has a lot of miles on it, and quite frankly, it could use an oil change. Now, the other thing I have to point out is, does the car smoke? Does the engine make any mechanical noises? Those are kind of big deal things. So let's get driving so this car can cool, kind of get back to it, and let's talk about those items. Because this car doesn't have it, but it's something you really need to pay attention to. Okay, a common noise in cars is a hydraulic lifter tick. Now, if the car is cold and it starts up and it goes tick, 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 and it goes away really quickly, oftentimes that's a hydraulic lifter. Now, this is where you got to know, and you can't just know immediately. If you have a tick or a clunk, could be a knock, an engine knock. That's bottom end bearing stuff. That's big time stuff. I generally just walk away from cars with a knock unless it's some crazy, valuable, big deal vintage thing that needs a rebuild and there are no others for sale in the country and I don't mind rebuilding the engine, which is rare. But a gentle lifter tick is not as big a deal. Now, how do you know if it's a lifter tick or how do you know if it's a knock? You can have a mechanic stethoscope, that'll help clue you in, but, and this requires kind of an experienced ear, camshafts rotate at half the speed of a crankshaft, unless I just totally screwed that up. Because it's a 4-stroke engine, of course, unless you're in a Wankel or some crazy old Saab with a 2-stroke engine or something. But camshafts spin slower, so the speed or the cadence, the frequency of a lifter tick is not as fast as if it was an engine knock. And generally speaking, if you have, this isn't necessarily all the case, but how do you tell if it's an engine knock from a main journal bearing or a connecting rod bearing? Connecting rod bearings, knocks, usually get a lot louder the higher you rev them, and main journal bearings can do weird things like kind of be loud at idle, and then when you rev them, they get a little quieter. There's weird things that can happen like that, just cluing you in. But that's something to keep in mind. Lifters are relatively easy to replace if they're ticking really bad, or if when you drive it, it just needs to pump up and it goes away. That's kind of common, especially on older German cars, and they'll be just fine if they're driven more regularly. So is it something that's been sitting a long time and it's a collector car, or is it something regularly been driven? Those are things to pay attention to. So also, when you first start up the car, look and see if there's any smoke out the exhaust, okay? Now, white smoke can mean it's like, it could be vapor, or it could be oil smoke. Generally speaking, oil smoke has a hint of blue color to it, just a little, okay? And oil smoke will linger in the air for a long time. But water vapor smoke, like if you burned a head gasket or something, will go and then it'll vanish quicker, okay? So pay attention. If you got whitish smoke and it lingers, it's oil smoke. And if it's, you know, not, it's probably water vapor. Black smoke is it's rich. So right now I'm in the country again, so we'll talk about smoke. So if I go ahead and downshift and I floor it and it's rolling black smoke as a gasoline engine, it's running way too rich and needs to be tuned up. That's just not good. You don't want none of that. If I downshift and I get on it, whoop, and now it's blowing white smoke that lingers, you're burning oil. Now, there's a couple things to know. If it's smoking when you're on the throttle, like white smoke, like engine oil smoke, that probably means your rings are worn out and shot and you're getting blow by. So the combustion happens and it blows by, and basically the oil gets by into the combustion chamber from the rings and blows out. So if you're on it and you're smoking out of the mosquitoes, it's probably the rings, okay? If you find that when you're going down the road and then you're braking and you're downshifting like this, and when you downshift, you see a puff of white smoke, that could more likely be worn out valve seals. So the oil is coming down the valve and doing that. If it's just a tiny little wisp, maybe it's not a big deal, especially if it's an older car. Maybe it needs to be driven a little bit more, but generally speaking, you're not gonna fix those things. Sometimes oil leaks on old seals and stuff will get a little bit better if the car gets driven more, but generally not. And as a last note regarding oil smoke, if the car, when you first start it up, especially cold, the first time in the morning, there's one poof of white smoke and it goes away and you don't see it anymore, and it doesn't do it when you're on the throttle or when you're on the overrun or slowing down or engine braking, that happens with a lot of older cars. I mean, it just means you probably have a valve seal or a valve guide that's just a touch leaky. It just leaked a little bit when it was shut down hot, and then poof, it just burns that little bit of oil. It's not that big a deal. It's not the end of the world. You can always check it again and restart it hot. And that's another thing. Before we end this, I'm gonna shut this car down and I'm gonna restart it hot and see, because it runs good, but sometimes you can have things tuned a certain way that doesn't want to restart when it's cold. So, and also do this when you're in civilization so you don't get stranded if it doesn't restart. Okay, go ahead and restart it. Fine. Now, sometimes older cars especially might take a little bit more cranking when they're hot to restart, just because. Well, we can go in that into another conversation. But just pay attention to that, and if you don't believe it, you can turn off, do it again. Just make sure it restarts every time, okay? So, good tips there. But going back to the oil smoke thing, sometimes if it's just a tiny little wisp of smoke on the startup when it's cold in the morning, not the end of the world. Just keep that in mind. You can drive that for a long time, it'll be fine, especially an older car with a lot of miles. I know older air-cooled Porsche 911s, not knocking them, they'll oftentimes do that. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. So you got to see if certain things are normal. And also when you're on forums and stuff looking for tips and such, take everything with a grain of salt. You be your barometer for intelligence or somebody just being pedantic. So consider who it is that is giving you the advice and then try to figure it out best. You know, don't be scared, but be cautious. You want to make a good decision. And if you're not sure about something, walk away. Simple as that, guys. So those are my tips for going out and test driving a car and buying it. But you really got to assess the car. Don't beat up other people's things. Be respectful. It might end up being yours. Or if you're selling a car one day, you hope that those people are being respectful of it as well. Obviously, obey traffic laws and do things that are safe. But try to assess all of the systems and check it out. So that's all I got, guys. Good luck car shopping, and I'll see you around. And also, I just started on Facebook, the No Snob Porsche 944 Squad. Yes! So all you guys out there enjoying your Porsche 944s and maybe Porsche 924s too. If y'all want to talk together, maybe hang out a little, do something in the future, just look it up, the No Snob Porsche 944 Squad on Facebook. I think we'll have some fun. And I'll see you guys next time. All right, you guys, quick tip. Avalon King Ceramic Coating is having a Labor's Day sale this Friday through Monday the 7th only. It's the time to get it. The stuff was designed specifically for DIY, and honestly, it's the simplest, best to use. I use it on all my nice stuff, i.e. the 928, the 944, the Viper, and soon to be the Aston Martin. Makes your car a million times easier to clean, and yes, it beats wax. And if I were smart, I would have used it on this dune buggy before I got it really dirty. Anyway, the sale, Labor Day, buy some, yes!